Hello everyone and welcome to the research project introduction. This is going to be a brief video that sort of explains what I expect your research project to cover, the mechanics, what I expect to be in the research project, and things of that nature. Okay, first of all, you can see that this is my World Civ 1 class. Obviously, if you're in one of my U.S. history classes, it's going to be a little bit different, but it should be set up roughly the same. So regardless of which class you're in, this video should work for you. Okay, so I'm assuming that if you're watching this video, you've managed to log into Blackboard. So once you log into Blackboard, you will notice over here listed under the available chapters is a new section entitled Research Project, and that's where all of your materials will be located. In fact, that's where this video will be located, so you should know where to go. Okay, so you click on Research Project and it brings up a series of different documents, and you won't need all of these documents. It just depends on what you decide to do for your research project. But the absolute first thing you need to do is click on the Research Project Guidelines, which should bring up this document. Okay, so this is just a very brief introduction into what I expect out of this research project. In this course, you will complete one research project, and you do have two options. Option number one is a 5-minute presentation. Essentially, you're going to be giving a mini lecture over a subject. It's just like if I was standing up at the front of class and giving a lecture over whatever we were talking about that day. You're going to be doing that, not for the entire class period, but for at least 5 minutes. You will be required to present the lecture in front of the class, provide visual aids, and turn in an outline. So please don't think that you can do the presentation option and not have to do any writing or research, because that's not the way it works. You have to do less writing, you have to do the same amount of research, it's just presented in a different way. So that's option number one. You can do a 5-minute presentation. Or you can do a 5-page paper, and this is the traditional formal research paper, title page, works cited page, footnotes, the whole 9 yards. And the reason I give you the option is I know not every student has taken Comp 1 at this point in their collegiate career. And that's fine. So maybe you don't feel comfortable writing a full-on research paper. Maybe it's been years since you took Comp 1 and you're not crazy about the idea of writing a research paper, and that's fine. So I want to give you the option of doing a presentation or a paper, but again, please don't get it in your mind that the presentation is going to be, quote unquote, easier than the actual paper. And the reason studies have shown that if you just speak at a normal pace of speaking, usually you can read through about 1 page per minute. So you're either doing 5 pages for a presentation or 5 pages for a formal paper. You should still be doing the same amount of research and the same amount of preparation, just not as much formal writing on the presentation as you do in the paper. But okay, those are your two options. So that's the first thing you have to do. First thing you have to do is decide, do I want to do a presentation or do I want to do the paper? The next thing, once you decide the mode of the project, you need to decide on which topic. Now, these are the only 3 topics that I'm allowing you to do the research paper, or excuse me, the research project over. And the reason I do that is, way back when I first started teaching, I allowed students to pick whatever topic they wanted to, and I got some really crazy off-the-wall papers. I'm talking about like the use of karate in the American Civil War, okay? Just some really weird stuff. And I want to try to stay away from that, okay? So you see here these 3 topics, and again, they're different for whichever class that you'll be in. You see here these 3 topics, pick one and write over that. If you just absolutely think that you cannot write on one of these topics, come see me and we'll figure something else out. But by and large, I'm going to restrict you to whatever 3 topics are available for your class. So that's what you need to do. You need to decide paper or presentation, and then decide the topic that you want to write over. Okay, once you get that out of the way, you can go back to Blackboard, and you see There are guidelines for both research paper and presentation. So whatever option you want to do, you only have to look at those guidelines. Now, of course, it wouldn't be a bad idea to go ahead and look at both to kind of get an idea of which one you want to do. But once you make that decision, that's all you have to worry about. So we're going to look at the research paper first. Okay, research paper guidelines. The purpose of any good research paper is not to simply list an array of facts and figures. It is to present a solid, concise thesis and then show evidence to support that thesis that you have gathered through research. So, for example, I'm not looking necessarily for a narrative. I'm not necessarily looking for a story. I don't want you to tell me George Washington was born this year in this place. He went to school in this year. He became president in this year. He did this during the Revolutionary War. I'm looking more for an argument. I want you to say, this is my argument, and here is my evidence to support that argument. That's the purpose of research. Here's my argument, and here's the evidence to support it. And if you look through the options, the options are kind of tailored that way. They're asking you to pick a side, and then whichever side you believe is correct, support that through the evidence, support that through the research. So, okay, for instance, a paper that details the events of the Great Depression probably won't make a very good research paper. It isn't making an argument that is backed up by research. A better paper would be, here is why the Great Depression happened. You know, that's more of an argumentative paper. That's more of a persuasive paper. Ideally, every paper in the world would deal with a unique topic. I realize that that's not going to be possible within the confines of this class. So I've given you a variety of topics to write over. Okay, plagiarism, and we've discussed this before, but just as a refresher, plagiarism is bad, obviously, first of all, but plagiarism is more than just the word for word copying, right? Yes, if you copy something word for word and you don't give credit to the original author, yes, that's obviously plagiarism. I think everybody's clear on that definition. But it's more than just the word for word copying, it's the idea. And again, I think I used this example the first week of class. Let's say that you're reading a primary source that's, 200 years old or 2,000 years old, right? And it's in a different language, it's been translated, it's kind of hard to understand. So you think to yourself, okay, this is a great source, I want to use it, but I need to put it in my own words. And since I'm not copying word for word, I don't have to give credit to the author because that's not plagiarism. Wrong. It is plagiarism. If you're copying the idea, that is plagiarism. Here's the general rule about plagiarism, okay? Number one, you don't have to cite it if it's an original idea out of your head. If you're if you came up with this all on your own, if it's your own conclusion, if it's your own analysis, obviously you don't have to put a citation because it came from you. Number two, you don't have to cite commonly held information. If you're writing about George Washington as the first president of the United States, you don't have to tell me where you found that information, okay? Everybody knows that. If you're writing about, July 4th, 1776, you don't have to tell me where you got the information that's, the Independence Day, because I know that. Everybody knows that. So unless it comes out of your head or it's commonly held information, you need to provide a citation just to be on the safe side. If you are in doubt, give me a citation. That's the safe thing to do. Okay, so plagiarism is not just the word for word copying, it's the copying of someone's idea. Unless it's an original idea out of your head or it's commonly held information, you need to provide a citation. You need to show me where you got your research. Okay. The flip side of that is, and I think I mentioned this too, even if you provide the citation, even if you provide the source, it may not be a very good paper if you copy it word for word. And I use the example of the internet, and we'll talk about the internet in just a second. But let's say that you find an internet source and you think that this is a fantastic source, and so you copy 2 or 3 paragraphs off that web page and you stick it in your paper, and you find another web page and you copy 3 or 4 more paragraphs and you stick that in your paper, and you go to another web page and you copy a few more paragraphs and you stick those in your paper, and you give the citations and you give the source for all that information. You're not committing plagiarism, but it's not going to be a very good paper, right? It's not going to flow together. There's no act of creation. There's no act of synthesis. So you still may fail the paper or project, but it's not because of plagiarism. It's just because it's not very well written, right? You need to take the research that you do and write it into your argument, write it into your narrative. Okay. As for sources, you will be required to cite at least 4. You need at least 4 sources, 2 of which must be in print format, either a book or a journal article or a newspaper or something of that sort. It must be a print format source. Now here's what I'm willing to do on print format sources. I know even with things like interlibrary loan, our resources can be limited. So I am willing to count internet sources as print sources as long as they were printed physically at some point in the past. And what I mean by that is, let's say you go to, the New York Times website and they have a copy of the New York Times from 1920, and it's a digital scan, it's a digital archive, it's the exact paper that was printed, it's just a digital image of it. I will count that as a print source. Even though you don't have the physical paper in front of you, I will still count that as a print source because it was physically printed at some point in the past. So there are any number of archival websites out there that have all sorts of journal articles and newspapers and primary documents from the past. And again, I will count those as print sources as long as they were printed at some point in the past. So you don't necessarily have to have it in front of you as long as it was physically printed at some point. Do not use your textbook as a source. Textbooks, dictionaries, these sorts of books are too broad. They don't give enough specific information. So don't use those sorts of books as sources. Wikipedia. And I'm sure you've all heard this, especially if you've taken maybe a comp class and in your other classes. Wikipedia is not a source. It's not a good source. Now, that doesn't mean that Wikipedia is bad, because Wikipedia is awesome, okay? Wikipedia is a great place to start, but do not cite it as one of your internet sources. I guess I didn't mention that. 2 must be print format. The other 2 can be internet-based sources. And a word about that. You can find all kinds of crazy stuff on the internet. So please make sure that the websites you use are reputable. If it's a government-based website or a national organization type deal, those are generally more reputable than just somebody's personal homepage. So 2 print, the other 2 can be internet as long as it's reputable, except don't use Wikipedia. Now here's the deal with Wikipedia. It can be edited by anyone, right? That's the problem with Wikipedia. Most of the time, 99% of the time, the information you find on Wikipedia is going to be credible. It's going to be accurate. But because there's that chance, you cannot use it as a source. But as I said, it is a wonderful place to start. Let's say you're going to do your paper over Teddy Roosevelt, and you don't know anything about Teddy Roosevelt except that maybe he was a president and now you have to write a paper over him. Wikipedia has all the information you could ever want about Teddy Roosevelt, about his early life, about his early political career, about his personal life, his marriages, about him as president, about his life after the presidency. Everything you could ever want to know about Teddy Roosevelt is right here. And that's wonderful, but you can't cite Wikipedia. Here's the deal. At the end of most Wikipedia articles, especially longer articles, there is a references section, and this references section is full of all the material that the people used to write this Wikipedia entry. So let's say, for example, let's find one. You're reading through here. Okay. Theodore Roosevelt Jr. was born October 27th, 1858 at East 20th Street in New York City, New York. For whatever reason, you absolutely have to have that in your paper. Now, you can't cite Wikipedia as where you got that information. But if you look after the sentence, that little superscript 4, if you click on it, it drops you down to the references section, and it tells you it got this particular bit of information. Now, this is referencing a book prior, Morris 1979, page 3. And so if you click on that, I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen. Oh, it's referring you to another book later on down, The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt. So here's what I'm saying. If you find something that you just absolutely have to have in one of these Wikipedia articles, that's fine if you use the original source. If you go down here to the references section and you can find where they got that information, you can cite this. So for example, whatever information they got from this book, the Theodore Roosevelt Cyclopedia, or this book, Theodore Roosevelt and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, 26th and 32nd Presidents of the United States. You can use that book, not Wikipedia itself, but you can use this book. Now here's the rub. You need to go to this book and make sure that what Wikipedia says it says is actually accurate, okay? Don't take Wikipedia's word for it. I want you, and especially it's easier with these references that have clickable links to it. I want you to go to that book and double check and make sure it says what Wikipedia says it says. So Wikipedia is a great place to start. If you don't know anything else about a subject, Wikipedia is a perfect place to start. You can get lots of good information and you can get leads to where you can find that information in sources you can use. You just can't use Wikipedia itself as a source. All of this stuff is fair game. All of these books, these bibliography books, all of this stuff is fair game. You can use this stuff as sources, just not Wikipedia itself. Okay. All right. Actual mechanics of the paper, it needs to be 4 to 5 pages in length. That does not include the title page or the works cited page. It does need to be double spaced, and it does need to have a title page and a works cited page. Standard 12-point font, Times New Roman or Arial, something of that nature. Standard 1-inch margins. Now, a brief word about the page requirement about this. Please, please, please do not do this. And it happens every semester. Someone will do it. Let's say you're writing your paper and you get to the end of your thought and you have exhausted your brain and you have wrung every possible bit of information out of it, and you look and your paper is only 3.5 pages, right? And 3.5 pages is not 4 pages, okay? If you go 3 pages in one line over onto the 4th page, that's not a 4-page paper, okay? So let's say that you've got 3.5 pages and you're thinking to yourself, man, I've got to stretch this out. So I'm going to make it 1.5-inch margins, and I'm going to bump it up to a 14-point font, and I'm going to pick a font that it's a little bit more spaced out. And so when you make all these changes, it bumps your paper up to a 5-page paper. Don't do that, okay? I would much rather you turn in a slightly shortened paper, and yeah, I'm going to knock points off of it, but at least you're not trying to trick me, right? I've seen it all. I've done most of it. So please, don't try to manipulate the mechanics of your paper in order to make it seem longer than it really is. 99% of the time, I will pick up on it, and I will knock off more points for that than I would for you missing, half a page of text or whatever. So 4 to 5 pages. Once you double space everything, once you start putting in footnotes, it's not really that long of a paper. I promise you, it's not going to be that difficult. Okay, and the last one here, Turabian style footnotes. That says from Weber. That's a mistake. It should say Blackboard. We don't use Weber anymore. But okay, Turabian style footnotes. I know most of you have probably never used footnotes before, and that's okay. I'm not going to grade super strict on it, but I do want you to be aware that something else is out there. For most of your comp papers, you've probably used MLA, the parenthetical expressions, where after the sentence you put the author's last name and maybe a page number. That's not the way that history papers are written. History papers usually use Turabian style, which is very similar to Chicago style, if you happen to see that anywhere. So we are going to use Turabian style footnotes, and I'll explain how to do that here in just a second. But okay, those are the actual mechanics of the research paper guidelines. Now I've given you some examples of what your paper should look like. This is an example of a title page. Now I'm using an older paper that I wrote back when I was in college. And this is what your title page should look like. Now, there are no hard and fast rules for title pages, and frankly, I don't care what your title page looks like. It needs to have your name, it needs to have my name, it needs to have the date, and it should have the title. Beyond that, you can pretty much arrange it in whatever order you want to. Just make sure it's spaced out and it looks nice and neat on the paper. So your name, my name, the date, the title of the paper. You might throw in the title of the course in there somewhere. But just make it look nice and neat, space it out, make it look presentable, and that's all you really got to do. Okay, this is an example page of text. Notice that it is double spaced. Notice that it is a standard font, standard margins. Pay particular attention to the second sentence of the second paragraph. Charles was the second son of King James I. James I was the first in the Stuart dynasty to wear the crown of England. That is not commonly held information. That is not an original idea out of my head. So I need to provide the source of that information. And you notice right after that sentence, there's a little superscript 1, that little numeral 1 that's hanging in the air. If you scroll down to the bottom of the paper, you will see there is a footnote, and that footnote contains the information on where I got that info. So I found that particular bit of information in a book written by J.P. Kenyon. The name of the book was The Stuarts, A Study in English Kingship, which was published in New York by John Wiley and Sons in 1967 on page 73. So you see, it's the exact same information that would be contained in an MLA citation. It's just the presentation of it is a little bit different. Okay, that's really the only big difference. So what I would do when I was taking notes, every time I cracked open a new book, every time I opened up a new website, I copied down all that information: the author, the title, the place of publication, the publisher, the date of publication, and then every time I took a note, I jotted down the page number after that note, so that when it was time to go back and write the actual paper, I would have all that information right there ready to go. The place of publication and the publisher, all that stuff can be found on the title page of the book, the first page of the book, on the back side of it. Okay, that is what a page of text should look like. Also pay attention to notes 3 and 5. You'll see that word, note number 3, says IBID. I'm not going to require you to use IBID because it's confusing. People always get confused by it. I'm not entirely sure why, but it seems to be very confusing to students, and it's kind of falling out of fashion anyway. So I'm not going to require you to use IBID, but I do want you to know what it is in case you happen to run across it in some other course or in some book. All IBID means is it's the exact same information as the note immediately before it. So when you see IBID on note number 3, that just means the information was exactly the same as note number 2. Instead of copying down all that information over again, you just write IBID. IBID it's Latin. It's and I can't remember exactly what it means exactly. Something to the effect of what has gone before, or something to that effect. You don't have to use it. That's fine. I just want you to know what it is. It just means that whatever note it's on is exactly the same as the note before it. Okay. The other thing is, if you notice here, note number 5, it just says Miller, comma 70, period. You only have to write out the long form of the note once. You only have to write out the author, the title, place of publication, publisher, date, and page number once. The first time you use that book, you give all that information. From there on out, every time you use that particular source, you can shorten it to, well, depending on what type of source it is. If it's a book, you can shorten it to the author's last name and the page number. If it's a website, you can shorten it to the name of the website, okay? So you see here, John Miller, The Stuarts, London, Hamilton in London, 2004, page 69. Every other time I use that particular source, I shortened it to Miller and then whatever the new page number was, okay? Please note that footnotes start at number 1 and then they go throughout the paper. So the first footnote on page number 2 in this particular paper would have been footnote number 6. Okay, they don't start over on each page. They start at 1 and they run through the entirety of the paper. Okay. And then this is an example of a works cited page. Notice a couple of things. Number 1, it is listed in alphabetical order. And number 2, that if you happen to run over on a second line, that second line is indented a little bit. That's known as a hanging indent. Why do we have hanging indents? I have no earthly idea, but that's the way it's done, so that's the way we're going to do it. And I'll show you how to do it here in just a second. It's pretty easy. Okay. Here's the thing about a works cited page, and this happens all the time, so I want to be sure that you guys don't do this. A works cited page is a collection of all the sources you used to create that paper. So let's say you're going to have at least 4 entries, right? Because you have to have at least 2 print and then 2 whatever sources. So you're going to have at least 4 entries because you have to have at least 4 sources. Here's what I run into all the time. If you don't use that source in a footnote, it does not go on the works cited page. A works cited page is not a bibliography. They are 2 separate things. They're similar, but they are separate. So don't think that a works cited page and a bibliography are exactly the same. A works cited page is a collection of sources that you have used to create that paper. And this is what I'm getting at. This is what I run into. Let's say that I'm reading through your paper and I'm reading through your footnotes and you use 4 sources in your footnotes just like you're supposed to. And that's perfect. That's wonderful. And so I'm thinking to myself, okay, this student went out and they read through these 4 sources and they used the information in these 4 sources to create their paper. And that's fine. That's perfect. If you want to do 5, if you want to do 6, that's fantastic. But you got to have at least 4. And then I get to the works cited page and I see that you've listed 10 books and websites and articles and newspapers and whatever. And so I'm thinking to myself, this student went out and read these 10 books, but they only used 4 of them in their paper. Did they take information from the other 6 and not give me the source? That's what I'm wondering. Okay, so when you do a works cited page, don't give me every book that you've read in creating this research project. Just list the sources that you take information from. That's what a bibliography is. A bibliography is a collection of all books that you might have read leading up to the paper, even if you didn't quote one of them, even if you didn't directly cite one of them. A works cited section is just the works that you used to create that paper. So please don't turn in a paper that has 4 sources listed in the footnotes and then 10 sources listed in the works cited, because I'm going to be wondering, did you take anything from those other 6 and just not cite it? That's what I'm going to be wondering. And don't do that, because that's going to make me think of plagiarism. So the works cited entries should match up with the footnotes. Now, they're not the same things, okay? I do want to make that clear. Don't just copy and paste all of your footnotes into the works cited section because they're two different things. You know, you might have used a particular source 3 or 4 times, and that's fine, that's wonderful. But even though you used a source 3 or 4 times for 3 or 4 footnotes, they only get one entry into the works cited page. So for example, this book right here, J.P. Kenyon, or a better example, John Miller, The Stewarts. I used that book at least twice, but it's only listed once in the works cited section, okay? So it's per source, not per footnote. So don't just copy and paste your footnotes because that's not going to work. The other thing is, notice that the forms are a little bit different. For example, here in the footnote, you see author's first name, then last name, comma, title of the book, open parentheses, place of publication, colon, publisher, comma, date of publication, close parentheses, comma, page number, period. And then on the works cited entry, referring to the same book, it's last name first, comma, last name, comma, first name, period, title, period, place of publication, colon, publisher, comma, date, period. So it's a little bit different format, a little bit different arrangement. So don't just copy and paste your footnotes because that's going to get you into trouble. Now, why are there two different forms? I don't know. I guess it's to make the life of college students more difficult. But that's the way it's done, so that's the way we're going to do it. Notice that there are no page numbers on the works cited page. That's because you're not referring to a particular page, you're referring to the work. You're telling me, I used this book, I used this website, I used this journal as a source for this paper. You don't have to give me the page number because you're not referring to the page. You're referring to the entirety of that work. Okay. I guess while we're talking about that, let's go ahead and talk about footnotes. It's very easy. If you're using Word, it does everything for you. If you're using something other than Word, then I don't really know. We'll have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis because I'm not familiar with a lot of other word processing programs. But okay, here we are. And I guess let's go ahead and set this up so it looks pretty accurate. And we're using, Times New Roman. We'll bump it up to 12. Okay. And so here you are, and you're writing your paper, and it's just the most wonderful paper anyone's ever created, and you get to a spot that you need to insert a footnote. And again, this is very easy. Word takes care of everything for you. You get to the spot where you need to insert a footnote. All you have to do is go up to the References tab, Insert Footnote. It places the superscript numeral for you, and then drops the cursor down to the bottom. You type in your information on that footnote, and then you can go back up and keep typing. And then the next time you get to a spot you need a footnote, insert footnote, it drops it down, you put in that information, and you can go about your merry way. It keeps track of the formatting, it keeps track of the numeration. It's very easy. It does everything for you. Insert footnote, 3, and so forth and so on. Very, very, very easy. Very easy. Okay, I will say this. Some students have asked me about this before in the past. This citation section right here. You can use that if you know how. I'm going to be upfront and honest with you. I don't know how. I don't know the ins and outs on how all that works. You can set this, the citation style. You can notice that Chicago is an option. Chicago is very close to Turabian. Turabian itself here is listed. Okay, fine. If you can figure out how to use this and it looks the way that it's supposed to look, more power to you. I'm just going to be honest and tell you I don't know all the ins and outs, so I may not be able to help you with that. Just a word of warning. Okay. And the other thing I wanted to show you was the Works Cited page. And remember, on a Works Cited page, two things. Number one, it is not double-spaced, it is single-spaced. And number two, if you go over on the second line, you need to have what's known as a hanging indent. That second line needs to be bumped over. So let's assume that you've got a really long source, and it goes on to 3 lines. Okay, you cannot just click over on the second line and hit the tab button, because if you hit the tab button, it's going to move everything over. It's not like a typewriter. On a typewriter, you can do that. On a word processor, it's not going to let you. What you need to do, you need to highlight everything and either right click or go up to this little drop down menu. It does the same thing. Select paragraph, and right here in the special box, this drop box entitled special, click on it, hit hanging, and it bumps it over for you. Very, very easy. Double space between entries. The entries themselves are single spaced, so you need double space between entries, and see, it takes care of everything for you. Easy, easy. Okay, that is the research paper option. I guess if you did the research presentation option, you just sat through all that for nothing, because now we're going to talk about that. Okay, and the meat of both options are the same, okay? You're still presenting an argument. You're still doing all the same research. You're required to cite at least 4 sources. 2 must be print. The other 2 can be internet. Same rules on Wikipedia. So the meat of it is the same. I don't want you to think that you can do less research in the presentation option, because that's not true. You still have to do research. You still have to show your research. It's just not as a formal style of writing as we're going to see in the research paper. So, okay, the presentation. Again, it's an argument. It's not just standing up in front of the class and reading a paper out loud. I'm looking for something a little bit more than that. Still the same source requirements. The actual requirements for the presentation, 5 to 6 minutes in length. I will be sitting there with a stopwatch. I will be timing you, and if you go too short, I will knock points off. If you go too long, I will knock points off. So 5 to 6 minutes in length. You do need to have some sort of visual aid. Now, most people like to do PowerPoints because it's easy and it's simple. You can get all sorts of stuff on the internet, and PowerPoint is completely fine. I've had students that make posters. I've had students that hand out handouts. I've had students that create little dioramas. Whatever you want to do, I don't care. You need to have some sort of visual aid. Most students do PowerPoint because it's the easiest. And you must turn in a formal outline of your presentation. So don't think you're not going to have to do any writing. You are going to have to do some writing. And the purpose of this outline is to show your research. That's where your citations will be. Okay, citations on the outline. I do expect you to use Turabian style citations. And again, I've got Weber. Anytime you see Weber, just think Blackboard. I just didn't update this. It slipped my mind. Okay, you don't have to use your citations. You don't have to say them out loud during your presentation. I do want to know where you got your information. So I've given you an example outline. So let's say you're standing up. You need to have some sort of attention-getting statement. Why are you talking to us today? You can use a quote. You can tell a story about it. Whatever you have to do. There's got to be some hook for the presentation, right? And then the thesis statement, that is, what is your presentation going to be over? And then give us a brief rundown of what you're going to talk to us about, and then get into your main points. So, okay, you have your body, you have your first main point. And if you're, let's say you're project option is, who was the better progressive president? Was it Teddy Roosevelt or Woodrow Wilson? So you have your first main point. I believe that Woodrow Wilson was the better progressive president because of point A. And I want you to give me the information. I want you to tell me where you got your information for your argument. So I want this to look exactly like a footnote, the same order of information. I want to have the author's name and page number and place of publication. I want to have all that good stuff, except it's just not going at the bottom of the page. It's going right up here in the body of the outline. And then your subpoints under that main point. If you need to give citations for those, that's fine. You can give them out to the side. And again, it should look just like a footnote, only it's going in the body of the outline instead of at the bottom of the page. And you have the second main point. I believe that Woodrow Wilson was a better progressive president because of point B. And tell me where you got that information, and then your subpoints. And then your third main point. I believe that Woodrow Wilson was the better progressive president because of point C. And give me all of that information and then whatever citations you need to under that. And then your conclusion, wrap it all up. And then at the very end, I do want a sources used section. So it would be like you're making a works cited page, only instead of giving it over to a separate page, I want a list of the sources used. So again, I expect you to do all the same research. I expect you to be able to present that research and show me where you got that information. It's just in a little bit different format, okay? All right. That was much quicker than the research paper. Okay, so decide which option you want to do, decide which format you want to do, the paper or the presentation, then decide what topic you want to research, look over the guidelines for both of them, think about it, and then begin your research. The last thing I want to talk about is Turabian style. And again, I know most of you aren't familiar with it, and that's fine. I'm just looking for a good faith effort, right? I'm not going to go through and count every comma and every period and make sure everything is in exactly the right order. I just want you to make a good faith effort in trying something new. So, just a brief introduction to Turabian style. And again, the whole purpose of citations, whether it's a footnote in the paper or an outline citation in the presentation, is to show me where you got your information so I know that you're doing your research. Okay, I've given you examples of all the different sources you're likely to run into. If you have a book by a single author, make it look like this. First name, last name, comma, title, open parentheses, place of publication, colon, publisher, comma, date of publication, close parentheses, comma, page number, period. So that's a book by a single author, book by multiple authors, newspaper article, magazine article, journal articles, and websites. Now, I will say websites. Every website is different, and they may not always have an author, right? If they have an author, of course, include it. But they may not always have an author. They may not always have a date attached to it. So at the bare minimum, what I'm looking for on a website entry is, number one, give it a title. If it doesn't have a title, just make one up for it, right? Give me the title. Give me the actual address. HTTP, whatever it is. I want to be able to type that into my browser and go directly to that page. So give me a title, give me the web address, and then give me the date that you looked at it. It doesn't necessarily have to be the date that the page was created. If that's on there, that's fantastic. But I want at least the date that you looked at it. So the title, even if you have to make one up, the web address, and then the date that you looked at it. I need at least those three pieces of information. Okay, and then as I mentioned earlier, the works cited form, whether you're doing the separate works cited page or just the list at the end of the outline, they should both look like this, and it is different than the footnotes. So don't just copy your footnotes or your citations from the outline and stick them all at the end, because that's going to be wrong. They look a little bit different. Okay. At the end, I just have a few reminders. I think I've gone over this There are two forms, one for footnotes, one for works cited. You only have to write out the long form of the note once. I went over that. When arranging the works cited page and the sources listed at the end of the outline, both of them, the entries are placed in alphabetical order and special hanging indent. Footnotes, it gives you a brief rundown on how Word will do the footnotes. Um, okay, and that's pretty much it. Um, and of course, if you ever have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. And you know, this is important. Being able to do research is an important part of not just you know, a history class, but college in general and in your life, right? So I know that maybe you haven't written a research paper in a while. Maybe you've never had to give a class presentation before. Maybe you haven't had speech yet. Maybe you haven't had speech or Comp 1 yet, right? And so you feel like you're in a tough spot. And that's fine. I understand that. I'm more than willing to work with you. I'm more than willing to help you as much as I can. But I do need to know that you need help. This is not due until April, right? And we're not going to spend a whole lot of class time on this because we have other stuff to cover. So every so often I'll ask, how's everything going on the research projects? And if I'm not hearing any questions, I'm going to assume that everything's going all right. So don't put this off to the last minute. Start work now. You're going to have your library orientations if you haven't had them already. So just get to work. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. And all right.